Hey everyone, I'm Stephanie.
And I'm Sandy.
And this is the Italian American Stories Podcast. All right, well, how's it going, Mom?
Good. We're at week 3.
We're at week 3. We're doing good now. So
Nothing broke down or
no
moves.
No moves. So we're doing good. I looked at the dates that we posted episodes. We posted the New Year's Eve one on December 28th. And then we didn't post again until like 3 months later, March 28th exactly. I was like, geez Louise.
It went by fast.
It did.
It was busy in between.
It was busy. So much change and everything.
Right.
We started recording just a little bit ago, and we had my 2 golden retrievers, Benny and Lucy, in here. We thought, well, we'll let them hang out in the podcast room with us for a while, and that was a mistake.
We wanted to be a little bit more of a podcast then.
Yes, exactly. Then like them itching and you hear their collars or licking their paws or trying to be petted a million times. So please.
Staring at the microphones.
Exactly. Staring at the microphones or just staring at you while you're talking. And it's like, what are you looking at? And so we had to kick them out and restart, but it's okay. Yeah. I would love to have them in here, but they are so, like, even when they're just laying in their beds, they're so loud. I'm like, stop licking your paws.
They get excited when we do.
They do, exactly. Yeah, like our voices will raise or something. Or like one time we were recording and I don't know, one of us said something really goofy and we both completely cracked up. We obviously cut it out of the episode. And Benny freaked out, remember? He was like all over us, like, what is happening? What's happening? But yeah, so we started over and so we're ready to talk about Charles Angelo Siringo. Have you ever heard of him, Mom?
No, I haven't.
It's a pretty remarkable story. I'm trying to start another podcast, the Headlines and Tidbits podcast. I don't really know when I'm going to have time for that, but it's one of my goals. And so I was...
That's a good goal.
It is a good goal, yeah. I'm excited for it. We'll see, maybe this summer. But I was researching some story, and I kept running across this name, Charles Siringo. And, I was just reading, and then all of a sudden I'm like, wait, Siringo sounds Italian. And so I stopped and I Googled him, and sure enough, he's Italian. So I'm like, nice. Switch gears, time to research this guy. But yeah, I've never heard of him. And as we get into his story, there's a lot of people out there who kind of research, the Western cowboy days, who say that he should be a lot more well-known than he is. So I'm excited to bring his story to life.
There you go.
Yep.
I'm excited to hear about it.
Yeah, it'll be an interesting one. I had to, as I was researching him, he has so much that happened in his life. I had to kind of weed some of it out, or this might be like a 4-part episode. I'm like, we can't do all of this guy's life, but he was interesting. So, I mean, he was a lawman, he was a rancher, he was an author. I think he wrote like 10 books.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, a lot of it was kind of just his own about his own adventures and stuff. So, yeah. He was a business owner. His bulk of his life, though, he worked for the Pinkerton Detective Agency. Have you heard of them?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, this has to be interesting.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, he infiltrated the Butch Cassidy gang.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, he's quite the guy. So,
his books are probably interesting too.
Yes, and filled with I don't want to say filled, but surrounded by so much controversy, and we'll get into all that. He really struggled to get them published. But yeah, so like I was saying earlier, a lot of people say that he should be as well known as like Wyatt Earp, or Pat Garrett, and Pat Garrett is the guy that killed Billy the Kid. So, but he just kind of didn't have that fame like those guys did. So, All right. Well, Charles was born on February 7th, 1855 in Matagorda, Texas. And his parents were both immigrants to America. His mother, Bridget White, she came from Ireland in 1850. And his father, Antonio Siringo, came from Salerno, Italy. I did see something that said Sicily, but I'm not really sure. There's not a whole lot of information on his father. Not even sure when he came to America. But his mother and father, they both met in Texas and married there on October 12th, 1852. Can you imagine 1850s? Anywhere in America, but in Texas, the whole western side of the United States.
Yeah, that's just can't imagine 1852.
Yeah, that's a good point. Me either. Or giving birth, because they had a daughter, Catherine, in 1853. So, and then in 1955, Charles was born. But so Antonio, their father, he sadly died a year after Charles was born. So that left Bridget alone with these two kids and a ranch in Texas. So that's quite the situation. And because of that, Charles, he never really knew his dad. He was only a year old. So that's kind of sad.
Right.
So he went to public school until about the age of 12, when he was recruited to work as a cowboy out on a ranch in Texas. So, he was out wrangling cattle and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah. Get that age out there on a ranch and you go to work.
You go to work, exactly. I mean, probably even going to school until 12 was a good achievement. So his mother, she did end up remarrying in 1867, and boy, this guy she remarries, he's a real doozy. She married a William Carrier, and he convinced her to sell all of her property in Texas.
Oh, no.
I know. You can see where this is going. And move with him, where he said that he had his own property. She probably inherited this property after her husband died, and I'm sure Charles, working on the ranch, was helping support this property, but she sells it, and they moved to Illinois with this guy. So, but after William spent almost all of Bridget's money that she got from selling her land, I know, and gambling and liquor was his vices. He abandoned the family, leaving them completely broke in Illinois. So Bridget, she took up work, anything that she could find to try to make ends meet. But Charles was not going to stay in Illinois. He was determined to get back to Texas. He's like, I'm not staying. And he did. He made it back to Texas. I think he was like 13, 14.
On his own?
On his own, yeah. So he would stow away on like different ferries and trains and made his way back to Texas, because they didn't have any money for him to book a ride back. So, but he made it back.
And she stayed with the daughter?
Yes, yeah. Wow. So I'm assuming, I didn't really see a whole lot about the daughter, but I'm assuming she was... the daughter at that point had to have been like 17. If he was 15-ish, she was probably 16. She could have even been on her own and married, but yeah, the mom did stay, and they meet up again later on. We'll talk about that. But yeah, so he found his way back to Texas. And once back in Texas, he became an official cowboy where he would do things like herd the cattle. He would sing to the cattle at night to keep them calm. And according to Charles, during this time, he became an expert at riding bad horses and roping wild cattle. And he's pretty good with horses. We'll see a few of examples of that later, but he's an impressive guy. And he eventually did become a trail driver, and he worked on the Chisholm Trail. I think that's how you say it. And this trail, it was used in the post-Civil War era to drive cattle overland from ranches in Texas to the Kansas railheads. And it was the Chisholm Trail, it was actually considered a wonder of the Western world during the late 1800s. That's kind of cool, huh? I guess, you had to think about like just the massive like longhorns that they would drive, because I saw that that's one of the main things that they drove on this trail. It was probably thousands of this cattle. It was probably a wonder to see. I can only imagine.
Yeah.
So
Texas Longhorn.
Yeah. So they would drive those up, and but not only was it a wonder to see, it was important due to the economic influence that it had in that area, and a lot of people depended on the cattle drives for their income. So you think anybody from the cattle owners, the ranch owners, to the guys driving the cattle, there's cooks along the way who would cook the food. This is probably a huge economic thing. True. So during this time, Charles was working for the LX Ranch, and this is where he first met Billy the Kid.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And so Billy the Kid and his gang members, they were spotted one day resting under some cottonwoods on the LX Ranch, and Charles was like, well, I don't know who these guys are. I'm going to go over and talk to them, figure out what they're doing on our ranch. And then as he's talking to him, he kind of quickly realizes like, oh, these are criminals. These are not great guys. And he sat and he talked to him for a while. And Billy the Kid sort of opened up to him and started admitting some of his crimes to Charles. I think it was more just in like, exactly. We take the cattle, we take it from this ranch and sell it. And Charles said that Billy the Kid was, quote, surprisingly cheerful for a killer. So what would happen was, Charles, he would take the cattle up north to be sold from the Alex Ranch, but Billy the Kid at the same time was running his own operation in the same area, so they would end up almost passing by each other a lot because Billy the Kid, he would steal horses in New Mexico, bring them down, sell them in Texas, and then when he was in Texas, he would steal cattle, take the cattle up to New Mexico and sell it. And my guess is Billy the Kid was stealing cattle from the Alex Ranch because Charles started wanting to catch Billy the Kid at this point. And you gotta think he's only 18, 19 at this point, and he is like, this guy's stealing from us, we've got to catch him. So Charles actually puts together a group of men from the Alex Ranch to try and stop Billy the Kid. They stop basically driving cattle, and they're like a posse chasing after Billy the Kid. But they're not official deputies or marshals or anything. They're just the cattle ranch hands. So
on their property, though.
On their property, yeah. And so, but he wasn't able to catch Billy the Kid. But they actually did get some of his gang members and turned them over to law enforcement.
Oh, nice.
So they could get some of them. But during this whole time, Billy the Kid, he was actually killed in 1881 by Sheriff Patrick Garrett. But 4 years later, Charles, he did become an official marshal, and he was living in Caldwell, Texas, and he actually ran into one of the members of the Billy the Kid. Caldwell, Kansas. Yeah, sorry. Thank you for reminding me of that. And so he actually ran into one of the members of Billy the Kid, and this guy, he was working at, just a local store in the town, and they recognized each other. And so obviously he never got caught during that whole thing. And the gang member, he begged Charles not to give away his identity. And he told him, I'm reformed and living an honest life. I'm not that guy anymore. And so Charles was like, all right, that's fine. Like, just keep doing good, basically. But
oh, that's cool.
Yeah. But it didn't really work out.
Lying.
He was lying. Because 4 years later, a couple of towns over from Caldwell, this ex-gang member would rob a bank where a few people would actually end up dying. So, yeah. Well, so, he was kind of doing his trail runs and being a cowboy and a marshal. And then in 1884, he decided he was going to quit the ranching and trail life and decided that he wanted to kind of settle down and get married. And so he married a Mammy Lloyd. So they got married and settled down in Kansas, and Charles became a merchant. And the couple, they had a daughter in 1885 they named Viola. And I'm actually going to read the birth announcement because I've never ran across a birth announcement like this. It's pretty funny. So it came out in the Caldwell Advance on March 5th, 1885. And it says, "It's Charlie Siringo that hops around now like a new boy with a toy, or a boy with a new toy. It's a 10-pound girl in single wrap, Mother Hubbard design, and it came along on Saturday. Miss Siringo and daughter are doing nicely, and Charlie, well, if he ain't a happy man, then they don't make them."
Running around with a new toy?
Yeah, so hops are
replacing his gun? Is that what
I guess, maybe, yeah. But I had to read this a couple times. I'm like, what is this? I've never ran across a birth announcement like that.
That's funny.
It's not hilarious. But yeah, but luckily everybody was good.
That is quite the one.
It is. It was interesting. So in Charles, he actually moved his mother, Bridget, up to Kansas. And so I don't know. It was hard to find anything on her. I don't know if she had made her way back to Texas or if she was still in Illinois, but either way, when he kind of settled down, he brought her to Kansas. So
that's good.
Yeah. And so Charles and Mammy, they ran an ice cream parlor and an oyster parlor. Can you, I keep thinking, are those in the same building? Because the smells would be really weird.
Where do they get all the oysters?
I know.
From Kansas.
Well, remember we just did the Frank Fiore one,
right? Yeah.
And he ran an oyster.
Must have been
a big deal back then because there was oyster restaurants. This is an oyster parlor. I mean, and then how do they keep them fresh if they're bringing them in from the ocean? Again, maybe this is stuff we don't want to know. And actually, I want to read another just part of an article that I found about him opening up this business. And it says, Charlie Siringo has quit the range and opened up a place where he will keep the best cigars, tobacco, confectionery, and choice fruits. Charlie is a sober, steady, and industrious young man, and we hope he will prosper in his new undertaking.
Well,
I love old newspaper articles.
That's cute, though.
It's definitely encouraging. Like,
right.
Hey, this new shop's opening up. Go help this young guy. Actually, here's another part of this article that I wanted to read. It's like they're really boosting his business in this paper. in another article, it says, when you want a good dish of ice cream served in a quiet place with pleasant surroundings, give him a call. And it makes me laugh how they do that.
Give him a call.
Give him a call.
To us, that's a phone call.
A phone call, yeah. Like, that's probably like, stop in the store and have some ice cream. Yeah. And actually, the couple, they made the newspaper quite a bit. In May of 1884, his wife, Mammy, she made the paper, and it says, Miss Charlie Siringo found $15 lying on the sidewalk Sunday evening, and as soon as the owner was discovered, she returned it to him. Honest little woman. A man would have kept it and played 7-Up on that stake for a week.
Well, $15 is a lot.
Yeah, that's a lot. Actually, let's see how much that is. Yeah, so $15 in 1884 is about $475 today.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so yeah, you could gamble on that for a while.
Yeah.
Only if you're a man, though. A woman would never do that. But he also, in Kansas, started writing his first book. This book was called A Texas Cowboy, or 15 Years on the Hurricane Deck of a Spanish Pony. And so it was just basically like his memoirs, his stories about, running the cattle and the trails and stuff like that. Yeah, like I said, he wrote a ton of books. So.
Yeah, that's an interesting title.
I know.
Deck.
Does that just mean the back of a pony?
I don't know.
Maybe the pony was fast. I don't know.
All the stuff he went through.
Oh, that's true. Yeah.
Be like a hurricane.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Because it's just chaotic and crazy.
Right.
So I found another interesting tidbit about Charles. So, he's living in Caldwell, Kansas, and a blind phrenologist came through Caldwell. I had to look that up. I had no idea. So according to Wikipedia, phrenology is a pseudoscience that involves the measurement of bumps on the skull to predict mental traits. So basically, somebody would come and just fill your head, and if you had any weird bumps, they could say that represents this mental problem or this mental issue. Like it says, it's a pseudoscience, so...
And this guy was blind?
This guy was blind. And so this particular phrenologist, that's hard to say, inspected Charles' skull and determined that he had a pronounced bump that showed a mule-like stubbornness. And apparently, this type of bump would only, allow him to do basically 3 professions. A rancher, a newspaper editor, or a detective. So
where did the newspaper editor end?
Doesn't that seem so different?
Yeah.
So they're just filling, they fill this bump and they're like, oh, you're going to be a rancher, newspaper, or a detective guy.
Or you could be an office person.
Or you could be an office person. Maybe a teacher. I don't know. It just feels so weird, right?
Yeah, that's funny.
I've never heard of that either.
Well, yeah, he was covering all areas. So.
Yes, he was. You're gonna believe me because one of these you are gonna like.
Right.
But apparently, this struck a chord, or it was true, because just 2 short years later, after moving to Kansas, Charles, maybe he was bored, moved his family to Chicago and joined the Pinkerton Detective Agency. And so he was able to attain this job not only based off of his merits, but because he received a recommendation from Sheriff Patrick Garrett, and that was the sheriff that tracked down and killed Billy the Kid.
Right.
That recommendation went a long way for him.
I'm sure.
Yeah. And so we kind of talked about the Pinkerton Agency earlier, but it's pretty well known. And so it was started in the 1800s by Alan Pinkerton. And I didn't know this, but Alan Pinkerton was at one point a bodyguard for Abraham Lincoln.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And so the Pinkerton Agency, at one point, they employed 2,000 detectives, but they had over 30,000 on reserve across the United States, which at that time was larger than the U.S. Army. The U.S. Army Reserve, I apologize. So that's pretty big.
Yeah, that's amazing, actually.
I know, yeah, that was that big of a agency. And Charles, he would end up working for the Pinkerton Agency for 22 years. And he worked cases all the way from Alaska to Texas, even down to Mexico City. So
wow.
It's quite a few years.
That would have been interesting.
Yeah, and that's where kind of the bulk of this story will sort of stay for a while. And like I said, there were so many accounts that I tried to find some of the most exciting ones, though, or just interesting ones, but we'll get into some of those. But kind of going back to Chicago, he really didn't want to work on the eastern side of the U.S. He's like, I'm a Western guy, that's it. So that was kind of like one of his deals, like, I'll work for you, but you got to keep me out west. And so he was stationed out of the Denver Pinkerton headquarters.
Oh, that's cool.
Yeah. And, cattle ranches were still huge at this time. And, they were thriving. And with that came, corruption and crime and all of that. And so Charles was kind of perfect for this because he understood the Western states. He understood cattle and ranches and all of that kind of stuff. Right. So it's kind of the perfect fit for him. But before he made it to Denver, Pinkerton was like, all right, well, we'll let you live in Denver in the Western states, but first you got to stay in Chicago and help us with the Haymarket riots in Chicago. So basically the Haymarket riots, there were a lot of, labor unions were trying to get established. And with that came just a lot of tensions in the cities. And some unionists, they had called a meeting in the Haymarket Square to protest police brutality. And at this point, somebody, I don't know who did it, like what side did it, but somebody threw a bomb into the crowd, and 7 policemen died and 60 people were injured.
Wow.
So, of course at this time it just completely disrupts and goes on for days. And so police and the union workers, they were firing on each other, they were fighting, and it just led to massive riots. And so I think that they, at this point, were basically just calling in anybody and everybody that they could.
They needed all the help they could get.
Exactly, to just kind of help calm these riots down. And so that's what Charles did. But then he made it back to Denver, and he found himself working inside a building in the city of Denver. I mean, it wasn't a big city at that point, but...
Oh, that blind guy was right.
Yes, exactly. You will be working with papers. And he hated this. Like, he was happy he was in the Western states, but he didn't really like being in Denver, which is kind of bigger, and he hated being in the office. And so because of this, he would take any case that he could just to get outside. And in 1887, he went on a mission to find an escaped convict who was thought to be hiding with an outlaw on a ranch in Wyoming. And this is kind of a funny story. So Charles, he leaves Denver, heads up to Wyoming, and he's on his horse. And when he approaches the ranch, he kind of decides, well, I need to come up with a good story for why I'm here and why I'm approaching this ranch, because they're going to be suspicious, especially if this gang is holding a escaped convict. And so he decides that he is going to fake falling off of his horse and break his leg. And actually he does this. This is kind of the first one, but he goes undercover a lot, and he does this a lot. Like, he fakes like, oh, I broke my leg or I hurt my shoulder, because it makes him vulnerable and people would take him in. And so that was like his way to kind of get in with a bunch of people. And this is where it first started.
Smooth move.
Smooth move. And so, like I said, he faked that he fell off his horse and broke his leg. And he even had his horse get down on the ground and roll in the dirt to make this story believable.
Wow.
And so that just kind of shows how good he was with horses. Right. So he decides, so he approaches the gang, he's limping, and he tells them, look, I'm just looking for some help. I just fell off my horse. I just need some help. So the gang is like, all right. And they carry him into the house. I can just imagine, he's not hurt, and they're carrying him in the house. But they were really suspicious of him. They weren't quite sure. And they actually contemplated hanging him to, quote, frighten a confession out of him just in case he was a detective.
Oh.
So, yeah.
So they had a smooth move, too.
Yeah, they did. They were kind of onto him a little bit. But he didn't break, and he's like, I'm not a detective. I'm just this guy riding across the prairie or whatever and hurt my leg. And the leader of the gang decided that, you know what, Charles is an all right guy. He's fine. He's not a detective. Let's leave him alone. Let's help him out. And the leader of this gang makes him a pair of crutches.
Wow.
I'm sure
He's
it doesn't.
A good actor.
I know he is. And I'm sure these crutches don't work the way we think they do, but
right.
Yeah. And so, the man that he was looking for at this point, he figures out was long gone. He was hanging out with them for a while, but took off. But Charles, he stayed with them for over a week. He stayed with them for a few weeks, just trying to gather intel, pretending like his leg is healing up, I guess. And then he was able to determine where the man was. So as soon as he kind of figured out where this man was, he took off back to Denver, and they ended up catching him. He was back in Texas. So
that's a long time to be faking it and not You would think one of those members would have noticed something like, oh, see, he's walking now.
I know. I would have thought that too. And, like a leg break is a pretty big deal. And maybe he had it like a sprain or something, like maybe I twisted my ankle. But I know that's a long time to not get caught. And maybe that's why as soon as he figured out where this guy was, he booked it out of there. But can you imagine what his wife was thinking? Like, he's married at this point.
Yeah.
So, like, okay, you're going to go catch this guy in Wyoming, and he's gone for a few weeks? That would be crazy.
Yeah, I guess they're used to it.
That's true. And I actually ran across a really funny story about Mammy. And every once in a while, she would actually, not every once in a while, she only did this once. She would play along with Charles' undercover work. And so, this is a funny story.
Oh, wow. She went with him?
Yeah. Yeah, she only did it once, though, because it doesn't turn out too good. So sometime in the 1880s, I couldn't quite figure out an exact date, he went undercover as a mine worker in Fairplay, Colorado. And I'm not sure what he was there for. I don't know if he was if there was some corruption going on and, maybe there was union stuff. I don't know. But he was definitely there trying to gather information about something. And so he convinces Mammy to come to Fairplay with their daughter and stay at the local hotel. Now, actually, they stayed in the little town Alma, Colorado, which is really close to Fairplay. But so now, Fairplay and Alma, even today, are not large towns. I think I looked at Alma, and in the 2020 census, it was like 230 people. Fairplay is 780 people. So even today, these are not large towns. So imagine what it's like in 1880s. And I mean, now, when you drive through there, my husband and I went on a fishing trip there, I think around 2020. They're really populated in the summer because there's so much activity going on. But, probably in the winter when all the recreation activities and everybody's gone, they're just little towns. So in the 1880s, and like, how did she even get there?
I don't know. It's amazing how they get anywhere, like on horse, than just to go find the gang. How do you know where to find the gang? It's not. That's
true.
Take a left here.
Take a left turn on the dirt road next to the pine tree, and like how do they? I didn't even think about that. That's a good point. I can't even imagine. But anyway, so she goes down there, takes the little girl, and so her cover is that she is pretending to be the widowed niece of one of Charles's friends. I know, like it's kind of like that's my cousin's brother's best friend. So she's pretending to be the widowed niece of one of Charles's friends. I don't know. That's the story they came up with. And what I think is really funny, it's like that's a really weird connection. Why are you visiting him in Fairplay?
Yeah, and the niece.
And the niece.
It's not like
it was the wife of his friend.
Or the friend's sister.
Exactly. Like, this is the niece. And so anyways, that was her cover. And so they even taught the daughter, Viola, not to call Charles Papa. So, like, I'm not your dad when we're here, okay? Like, don't call me Papa. And so
they're all actors.
They are all actors. And so almost every night, Charles would appear in the hotel's dining room to have dinner with this niece of a friend. And, to have dinner with her and her daughter. I guess it worked for a while. So, and, so he would have dinner, and then usually later in the evenings, when it's dark and late and everybody's in bed, Charles would come back to the hotel and sneak into Mammy's room. But he was sure to sneak out before dawn so he could get back and work in the mines.
Wow, that's funny.
This is a lot of work.
Yeah.
Like, a lot of work.
They're all actors.
They're all actors. And so during this time, like, he went under the alias of Charles Leon. His whole story behind Charles Leon, that he was a Texas cowboy with a dark past and a rich father who would pay all of his bills. A dark past just reminds me of like a Western romance novel. Mm-hmm. He's this, sultry cowboy with a dark past.
That explains all his writings.
That's true.
He's good at coming up with things like that.
That's a good point. He's creative. But bringing Mammy down here to Alma may have not been a great idea, because Mammy was never really this close, so she didn't hear about, that side of Charles a whole lot. But, yeah. So a lot of the women in the hotel noticed that she was spending time with Charles. And so these women felt that they needed to warn her on what type of man Charles truly was. And so they would tell her things like, he's constantly frequenting the saloons in Fairplay, which, I'm sure with that came some, indiscreet stuff. And they told her, quote, he was raising hell with bar trash over in Fairplay. And so, needless to say, after this, Mammy never joined him on assignment again.
I'm surprised she went back with him.
I am surprised she did too. I think it was probably like that, you know what, I don't need to know this side of your life. Like, this is not for me. But sadly, though, just a few years after that, Mammy, she actually passed away in Denver in 1890. And so she was sick with pleurisy. Pleurisy? Oh, I bet you're right. Pleurisy.
I've heard of pleurisy.
I bet that's it. So pleurisy is inflammation of the tissues that line the outside of the lungs and the inner chest. And so she had an operation to try to fix this, but sadly she died shortly thereafter. And she actually died in Charles's arms.
Oh, wow.
I know. So he was holding...
Well, at least he was there for her.
Yeah, at least he was there, yeah. And actually when she became sick, he pulled back and was like, hey, I gotta lay off of all this stuff, because he just wanted to constantly be out, and came back to Denver to be with her. So that was good. So he was holding her in a chair near a window so that she could get fresh air, and that was when she passed away.
Oh.
I know. And so she was buried at Riverside Cemetery, which,
that's one that you went through several times.
Oh, man, I've gone through there looking for a Carabetta relative of ours and a Labriola relative of ours. It's a really old cemetery. I mean, you got to think she died in 1890 and was buried there.
Yeah.
There's, I think one of the relatives that I was looking for, a Labriola relative of ours, died in 1870 that's buried there. But a lot of these gravestones that are there were kind of, I don't want to say sandstone, but sort of that material. So they're just degraded. And didn't you go with me one time?
I don't know.
I don't know
Because I was
either.
just going to say, you sent me a lot of pictures.
Yes.
But I'm not sure if I walked through it.
I can't remember either. I mean, we walked through Mount Olivet a lot, but...
Right. I'm not sure.
I can't remember either. But yeah,
I remember that, though, because isn't that the one with all the weeds and stuff?
Yeah. Yes, it's
I don't
overgrown.
think I did. I think you sent the pictures.
I just sent you pictures. Okay. Yeah.
I remember thinking, oh, you shouldn't be there alone.
Yeah. Yes. It is in a little bit of a rougher part of town now. And but yeah, it's overgrown. I mean,
yeah, it's not very well kept.
It's not well kept. And a lot of the gravestones, I think I found the place where our relatives are, but I can't verify it because the gravestone is basically just disintegrated. So, and there's never really anybody there to, get information from. But yeah, so she was buried there. And after she passed away, Charles told the Pinkerton Agency that he needed to stay close to Denver and only take local cases, probably, so he can spend time with his daughter and, help raise her. But because of this, it caused him to take a cut in pay. So he would occasionally pawn his Colt 45s, which are, I think, one of the most unique guns now. They're worth a ton of money.
Oh. Wow.
Yeah, so, he'd go put them on pawn or whatever so that he could get money. And one night he left the office and was walking to a pawn shop to go pick up his gun. And this pawn shop was on Larimer Street, which is one of the oldest streets in Denver.
Yeah.
Mom and I have been there a couple of times. And it's also called Larimer Square now. And it's the oldest block in Denver.
Yeah, it's really neat now.
It's so cool. Because a lot of the old Victorian buildings are there, the brick buildings. And it's neat because Mom and I actually have, I should post this picture. A picture of her and I standing in front of a statue. And it's something like where they first marked the area for Denver.
Yeah.
Yeah,
that's cool. I forgot about
that too. I'll post that. But yeah, so anyway, so he's walking to the pawn shop and he notices a crowd is starting to gather around. And when he approaches the crowd, he finds out that they're there because they're waiting to see the arrival of a body that was pulled from an explosion. So apparently, I don't know if this was at a mine or a building, but some explosion happened and they pulled this body out and is probably bringing it to Denver to, I don't know. But anyways, this crowd of people is just waiting around to see this.
Are they waiting just to see a dead blown up body?
I think
or are
so.
they relatives of somebody that
I think they just want to watch to see the dead body because Charles is like, cool, I'll join in. But he decided that he wanted a better view, so he climbed up an iron fence. And I saw in a couple different articles like that he was just sitting on the fence, or he climbed up the iron fence to sit in a window pane, like a window sill. Thank you. And so, regardless, he's just kind of sitting up on this higher point, watching this whole thing go down. And this is crazy. A police officer goes by and is like, hey, you can't be up there, and just reaches up and yanks on Charles's coat, pulling him down. Well, this didn't sit well with Charles, and Charles was carrying an umbrella, and he hits the police officer over the head with the umbrella.
That's in the black.
Well, I mean, it is kind of a funny, like,
tough guy with the umbrella.
with the umbrella, waiting for a dead body. I mean, it's just, the story is strange. And so this causes the police officer to reach for his pistol, but Charles was faster and drew his pistol first and pressed it against the chest of the police officer. So Charles cocks the hammer and pulls the trigger. But right as he's doing this, another policeman comes over, throws his arms around Charles, and due to some amazing fate, this police officer's thumb gets jammed under the hammer, and and it stops the gun from firing. Wow. Can you imagine everything had to line up for that to happen?
To set that up, it would probably take several tries.
Oh, yeah, exactly. You could not remake that happen if somebody paid you $1 million. But Charles was taken to the city jail, and his boss at the Pinkerton Agency went to the city jail and convinced them to release Charles. Wow. So he was, the captain was not happy about it. I read in the article in some of the newspapers. Yeah, sure. But I think the Pinkerton Agency held a lot of influence at that time. I saw where a lot of, just civilians were kind of mad about this because they were like, if that was just one of us, we wouldn't be out of jail. And that officer said that this was years later in an article where he said he would see Charles every once in a while around the city, and they're like, we just avoided each other. I'm like,
when he tried to kill.
Like, well, that's good. Let's definitely avoid each other. But after this, Viola was sent to live with her aunt in Illinois. I think Charles was like, I can't do this. I got to get out of this city. I can't handle this. So, and that aunt was her mom's sister. And so Charles went right back to doing his undercover assignments with Pinkerton, where he did not have to stay in Denver all the time. He could be out in the open. Exactly. Yeah. Get on his horse and go. And so in 1892, he accepted an assignment in Idaho to go undercover in the mines. And you have to think about this. He obviously learned, this is his second mining undercover job. He had to have learned how to be a miner too,
Right. Yeah, I never thought of that.
Yeah, me either.
Can't just be out there roaming around. I'm just visiting today.
Exactly. Just thought I'd hang out again today. And so he was gathering information about a labor union that was developing at this mine. And Charles, as much as he wanted out of Denver, he was a little reluctant to take this job at first because he was in favor of unions and, creating workers' rights and, let's not work them 18 hours a day kind of thing. But after going undercover, his opinions kind of changed a bit because he saw that there was so much corruption going on with this particular union. So it kind of changed his mind a little bit. And he also somehow became elected as the recording secretary for the miners' union. So he was
a very likable guy.
Exactly. I was going to say.
In any place that he was at.
Any place he went. He had to have been a charmer because,
that's a good way.
The recording secretary, he probably knew everything that was going on. While he was there, he went under the alias C. Leon Allison. So he liked that name, Leon, because he used that in the other one too. And so this was at the Gem Mine in Wallace, Idaho. And one piece of information that he was able to gather for the mine owners was that some labor union rioters were on a train headed to Wallace to protest at the mine. And so the mine owners somehow convinced the train to just keep going right on past the Wallace train station and keep going. So I'm sure the protesters were probably like, what the heck? And then you got to think, if there were people who were trying to catch the train, they were probably like, what was
Right,
happening? But
they had some money there that convinced them.
exactly. Yep. But eventually Charles' identity was discovered and, he lost his cover. So he had to quickly get out of Idaho because Charles was a huge target for the Union. Like, they were after him. They knew that he was the narc, basically.
Right.
And so he fled to Frisco, Idaho to hide out for a while, kind of until everything calmed down and he could get back to his regular life. And he would sleep with his shotgun every night. So he was definitely freaked out over this. And rightfully so, because one day the union workers, they figured out where he was and they came for him. And he had made friends with a local store owner. Her name was Miss Shipley. And she actually helped him out quite a bit. She helped him come up with an escape route. So,
that's cool.
And this is another crazy story. So they decided, like, let's cut a hole in your floorboards of the store. So if the union workers come for me, I can just hide under your store. And so, the union workers come and he goes into the hole and she puts a rug under it or over it and puts a wooden chest on top of the rug. But before he went down there, she gave him a sandwich and coffee. We don't know how long you're going to be down there. And so, he was initially intending to just wait it out under the storefront. But when he realized that they were intent on finding him and burning him on a stake, he decided he better move immediately. And so he soldier crawls out of the storefront's foundation basement area. I don't really know how he did this. I don't know if there was they created some kind of an escape route so he could get out. But he gets out from underneath the storefront and then he crawls to the town's boardwalk. So like their sidewalk, but it was all boards. Right. And crawls under the boardwalk. And so he's soldier crawling and actually ends up right underneath the feet of the men who were coming to get him. Oh, wow. And so he can hear them we are out for them. We'll tear this town apart. So he just keeps soldier crawling. And in fact, he crawls the length of 3 buildings and emerged through the floor of a saloon.
Wow.
I know. I don't know if that was part of the escape route that they made or if he just luckily found a hole and could go through the saloon.
Yeah, I don't know.
It's kind of interesting.
Why there would be openings.
Yeah. How do you...
Yeah.
I don't know if he quickly got out of the boardwalk and then ducked back down into I have no idea. But so once in the saloon, he escapes through one of the saloon's windows and took refuge in the woods for a while. Can you imagine all the patrons at the bar? They're probably like, are we really seeing this?
I need water, please.
I better switch to water. You got any pretzels? But one of the armed guards who worked for the mines found him and let him take refuge with him. So,
that's cool.
Yeah. Throughout this, the Idaho mines, they continue to have major riots and protests, but the U.S. military eventually stepped in and restored order. And so at that point, Charles felt like, okay, I can go back to my normal life. Everything's kind of calmed down. And he had a lot of these close calls. For example, one time while he was working undercover in a mine in Cripple Creek, Colorado, another detective let it slip that Charles, he's a detective. It's like, wow, thanks a lot, guy. We're both here undercover and you rat me out. So, of course, the mine workers, they were upset about this and they went after Charles, threatening to throw him down an abandoned mine shaft.
Wow.
Yeah. But he was saved by a, quote, tough dance hall girl. And he said that later on she, quote, saved my bacon.
That's funny.
So she told him that she couldn't believe that this scrappy skinny guy could actually be a detective. So she genuinely thought there's no way this guy is a detective. Come on. And she convinced the others that there was no way he was a detective. And she said, quote, he was too degraded to be a detective. And the men were like, yeah, you're right. Let's let him go. It's
there again. Good act.
Thanks for saving me and demeaning me at the same time. And so in 1893, Charles, he remarried. Her name was Lillian Thomas. And together they had a son who they named William Leroy Siringo. Leroy. Wow. I like that. And so, unfortunately, their marriage didn't last long, and the couple divorced shortly after William was born. He was born in 1896. She wanted to move to Los Angeles and have a more quote-unquote normal life versus, this life they were living.
Well, I guess guess that a little bit more civilized.
Yeah, probably especially after they had the kid. She was probably like, okay, like this is crazy. And so, but of course, Charles, he wasn't going to do that. So she left and took William to California. But yeah, I mean, hard life. It's a hard career. It's not going to be easy on a marriage. Actually, on one of his undercover jobs that he was on, it took him up to Oregon, and he married another woman in Oregon in 1905. But that only lasted like a couple months. So I just think maybe it had like this romantic appeal, but once you're kind of in that life with him, it's a hard life. We're talking early 1900s. Yeah. So, but a lot of his career, like we've been talking about, consisted of him going undercover and infiltrating gangs and various criminals. And he had a ton of aliases. We've talked about like Charles Leon, and he had Charles Carter, and at one point he went by Dole Knife. I don't know. Like Billy the Kid, Dole Knife? I don't know.
Wow.
But when he was undercover as Charles L. Carter, he actually infiltrated the Butch Cassidy gang, also known as the Wild Bunch. Huh. So this particular assignment, infiltrating the Wild Bunch, it would take Charles over 1,000 miles on horseback across the West. I know. And it would last over 4 years. So during these 4 years, a lot of the Wild Bunch gang members, they were killed, put in prison, or fled to South America. And Butch Cassidy, he actually ended up dying in 1907. But this was, after Charles had left the assignment. And I'm not really sure why he left the assignment. I don't know if they started catching on to who he was, or I don't know. But kind of cool, he infiltrated that gang for a while.
Well, maybe it wasn't really a gang anymore.
That's true. If they're all getting broke up, then yeah. But he was able to enter the, kind of get in with the gang by posing as a gunfighter on the run from a murder charge. And, he actually ended up gaining a lot of information while he was spending time with Butch Cassidy. The information he gained really impeded on their criminal activities. Like, for example, he stopped them from doing like a bunch of railroad robberies, and just by getting that information back.
Oh, because
Yeah, and so they would be able to stop him. So he loved playing the outlaw. That was one of his favorite things to do. But after 22 years, in 1907, Charles decided that it was time to retire from the Pinkerton Agency, and he wanted to retire and settle down on a ranch that he owned in New Mexico. And the ranch was called the Sunny Slope Ranch. He actually moved his mother somewhere along the line. I don't know when he bought this ranch, but somewhere from joining the Pinkerton Agency to now, he had bought this ranch in New Mexico. He loved New Mexico. It was kind of his place that he wanted to be. During that time, he moved his mother onto the ranch, and she would remain on the ranch until her death in 1911.
Oh, so he had moved her there while he was still working.
Yes, while he was still working. Yeah, so he owned the ranch, but he was out doing his Pinkerton jobs, but his mom would stay at the ranch. Yeah, and she was a truly loved woman, especially during her time in Kansas. And I actually want to read just a small part of her obituary that came out in the Caldwell, Kansas newspaper. It said, "Grandma Siringo lived in Caldwell for many years and was probably better known, especially to the children, than any person in the city. She was a quaint old character and a typical native of Ireland. She was missed after her departure, more than any other citizen who ever left the city. She was honored a year or two before her departure by being given a prize at the annual Old Settlers Picnic for being the oldest widow in the country, or in the county. Peace be to her ashes."
What was that last part?
Peace be to her ashes.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, they loved her in Caldwell, Kansas.
Yeah, that's cool.
Kind of neat, yeah. One of the reasons that Charles wanted to kind of retire and slow down was he wanted to start writing a book about his adventures with the Pinkerton Agency. So, he kind of settles down on this ranch. He starts raising chickens. He's writing his book. He raised Russian wolfhounds and rode horses. Kind of a different life for him compared to what he was doing.
But still doing what he liked.
Exactly. And so the title of this book that he was writing was called Pinkerton's Cowboy Detective. But the Pinkerton Agency did not like this, because they felt like he was kind of going to give away their secrets in a way. And so they basically didn't want him using their name in the title, and, didn't want them spilling their secrets. So the publication, it was actually held up for quite a few years. And in one headline in a Chicago, Illinois paper, it says, "Pinkerton Detective's Methods Exposed by Former Operative. Charles A. Siringo, in remarkable book, shows up well-known agency. Tells of work on big labor case, gives inside dope on Haymarket riots."
Uh-oh.
Yeah. So I think he was kind of and I'm not making accusations here because I have no idea, but, if there was any corruption within the Pinkerton Agency, I think he was kind of exposing some of that and talking about, like, exactly. And then even talking about, like, their inner workings, like how they would go about solving a case. So they kind of came to a settlement, and Charles, he decided to delete the name Pinkerton from the book. He just called it a Cowboy Detective, and it was published in 1912.
Oh, so it did get out.
It did get out. I think it was diluted from what he originally had, but it did get out. So, but because it was diluted and not quite what he wanted, that didn't sit well with Charles, and perhaps maybe driven by a little bit of vengeance, he went on to publish a book called Two Evil Isms, Pinkertonism and Anarchism. So I think
that's a tough comeback.
That is a tough comeback.
Yeah, he's out for
out
on this one.
Yeah, I think he kind of was like, okay, fine, I'll take out some of the stories and change the name, and then probably sat on that for a while and was like, no, I'm not okay with that. Like, I want to tell my story. But again, the Pinkerton Agency tried to stop him from publishing this book too. They were so mad that they actually charged him with libel and tried to have him extradited to Chicago to face the charges. But Charles, he's living in New Mexico on his ranch, and the governor of New Mexico actually blocked the extradition and wouldn't let them take him to to Chicago. And so, the Pinkerton, they couldn't keep fighting it because they weren't going anywhere, and just kind of dropped the matter. And he was able to publish his book. Yeah. So
I wonder if that might be an interesting read.
I know. That's what I think. It's hard to find. I looked on. I think you can find them in certain bookstores and stuff, but these books are so old,
right.
They're out of publication. But while in New Mexico in 1913, Charles married his final wife. I think this is wife number 4, and her name was Helen Partain. And they married in New Mexico at the Majestic Hotel. And I found an article about this marriage in the Daily Tribune. And the headline reads, "Old couple is married here. Bride 51 years old, weds groom of 58 years." And it's kind of a cute story. Old couple, I know. Like, we have to point that out. It's kind of a cute story because apparently Charles and Helen, they had met 40 years prior to their marriage in Texas. Boy. I know. And they were sweethearts when they were younger.
Oh,
yeah.
Wow.
So it was like, we're rekindling this.
That's interesting because, they don't have
social media,
right.
Like all of that kind of stuff. I know it's like,
yeah,
how do you,
me?
Yeah, it's like, did they just randomly run into each other? Yeah. But, you're young sweethearts, you kind of go your own ways. So they married in New Mexico, but it was obviously not a real, true long lost love because they were divorced within a couple of months. And
great.
I know.
You'd learn by now.
Exactly. Like, stop getting married, man. It's just not working. And she remarried in July of 1914. So they were married in 1913, I think May of 1913. And so they were divorced, and July of 1914, she'd already remarried. So
another long lost love.
Another long lost love, I guess. I don't know. But in a really weird, strange turn of events, Helen was shot to death in November of 1914. So she was on a hunting trip with her new husband and settled down at night in their camp. And one of the hunters that was with them was cleaning his shotgun when it discharged. And she was hit in the back with 2 bullets and died.
Wow.
And so her new husband, he was actually out on his horse and he heard the screams, but by the time he got back, she'd already passed away. So.
No, that's sad.
I know, kind of a weird little story. But Charles, he had trouble in retirement. He would get a little bored. He's gone from this exciting life of chasing down gains to, raising chickens.
and marriage.
And marriages. He liked to raise chickens and get married. So what he would do to kind of fill his time, he would take up just small jobs for local detective agencies and, kind of chasing down cattle thieves and stuff like that. And he also would participate in the local rodeos, and he would get into roping contests. And this was while he's in his 60s.
Wow.
I know. In fact, in 1916, he actually became a New Mexico Ranger and worked on breaking up cattle rustlers and thieves.
He's a tough guy.
He's a real tough guy. But after a few years of this, and, he's getting older, he decided that it was time to sell his beloved New Mexico ranch and move to California where his daughter was living. So somewhere somewhere in between Charles's crazy life, Viola went from Illinois to California. And so she was living there and she had a daughter. You know, he was getting older and his health was actually starting to fail a little bit at this time. So he wanted to be with his family.
Oh, that's
yeah.
nice.
But once he moved to California and living with his daughter, you know, they kind of tended to him a little bit and helped him recuperate. I don't know if he was just fatigued or tired, but he kind of rebounded. And then moved out of his daughter's house and bought his own little bungalow in Hollywood. Isn't that crazy?
Boy, it's doing a full circle.
Full circle. Like, the man who hated cities is living in a bungalow in Hollywood now. In California, he actually kind of became somewhat of a celebrity.
Why is that not surprising?
I know. Yeah, me either. I mean, it does not surprise me at all. He was associated with politicians, actors, and writers, and he would actually advise filmmakers on how to produce, you know, or direct a Western movie. Because, you know, this is the 1920s, and a lot of those Western movies are popular, and, you know, he was probably like, yeah, that's not really what cowboys do. Like, and so he would advise on that.
That was probably fun.
Oh, he probably loved that. And actually, he appeared in a movie in 1924 called,
wow.
yeah, it was called 9 Scars Make a Man. And he just played the part of an old cowboy.
With 9 scars?
With 9 scars. He probably had 900.
He was made after him.
It probably was, yeah. And so around Hollywood, he actually became known for his white mustache and his low-brimmed Stetson hat. And he would frequent a bar called the Waterhole, which, of course, he's going to go to the Waterhole. I mean, he's not going to go to any other bar if there's a bar called the Waterhole. And actually, a lot of movie extras would go to this bar as well. And he thought it was just really funny how their spurs were so shiny and their cowboy hats were so high. Because he's like, yeah, no, you...
Sign of a urban cowboy.
Urban cowboy, exactly, yeah. He's like, that's not how it really is. And, of course, once again in California, Charles decides, I'm going to write another book. And this book was called Riata and Spurs, and Riata means rope. And so this book is described of basically being a combo of the first 2 books. And guess what? Pinkerton was not happy about this one either. And they tried to shoot this book down too. So after a lot of litigation, Charles agreed to reduce some of the stories in the book about his time with Pinkerton. And again, he's just bound and determined. I think somebody should find his notes and memoirs and just write the book that he wanted, you know? Yeah. And so in 1928, at the age of 77, Charles died in Altadena, California on October 18th.
Wow, that's a good age for everything that he went through.
Oh my gosh, everything he went through. I mean, I never ran across if he had actually got shot, but I mean, it wouldn't surprise me, you know, I mean, everything that he went through. Kind of towards the end of his life, I think, you know, he's thinking back of everything that he had done, and he was worried that his adventures would have an impact on him. And he told a reporter, quote, "When the final call comes, I shall have to take my medicine, with Satan holding the spoon." So I think he was, you know, I'm sure he, in gunfights, killed people and, you know, that kind of stuff, and maybe feared that in the afterlife that would come back at him. So I just thought that was kind of interesting. And actually, when Charles passed away, Will Rogers, who was a huge fan of Charles Siringo, he renamed one of his books. I think the first book he wrote said this should just be called The Cowboy's Bible. So basically how to be a cowboy. So Will Rogers was a huge fan of Charles. And he said, quote, "Another American plainsman has taken the lawn trail. May flowers always grow over his grave."
Oh, that's sweet.
Yeah. And he wanted a poem carved on his tombstone. And this was, he just wanted a small verse of it. And this poem was by Badger Clark. And I know, what a name, huh? And so it says, "Just plant me in some stretch of west that's sunny, lone, and wide. Let cattle rub my tombstone and coyotes mourn their kin. Let horses pause and tromp the mound, but don't you fence it in." That's kind of cool.
Yeah, that's a song too.
It is?
Don't fence me in.
Eagles?
I think it goes way back to some
Don't Fence Me In. Let's see.
Gene Autry or something like that.
I think I'm thinking of, what is the Eagle song about the fence?
Oh.
Isn't there an Eagle song about the fence? Oh yeah, Don't Fence Me In is a song written in 1934 by Cole Porter and is sang by Bing Crosby sang it. So, that's cool. Okay, what's the Mending Fences? What's the Eagles song?
I'm a big Eagles fan, but
I can't think of the name. Desperado.
Oh.
Yeah. Hello. That's like exactly what we're talking about.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's funny.
Because he says there's something in there about fences. Okay, we're going to listen to this real quick.
Desperado,
With a song.
why don't you come to your senses? You've been out riding fences
Oh, okay.
for so long.
Okay, so that's what I was
Yeah,
thinking. You've been out
wow.
riding fences.
That's good.
Well, that's good.
Related to that.
That's good. You knew the what was the other one called?
Don't fence me
Don't
in.
fence me in. Yeah.
I'm dating myself.
That's funny. Well, that might have been for my dad.
Yeah.
Probably. All right. So it sounds like, towards the end of his life, he was able to be around family. And I'm hoping he connected with his son because if you remember, his son moved to California.
Right. When you first said that, I went to that.
Yeah.
I bet he went to find his son because he probably didn't even really know.
He probably didn't. So I'm hoping that he connected with him, but I couldn't find anything.
Yeah, you never know.
It's actually, like I was talking about at the beginning, I found Charles because I was researching this Ernest Bush, and this was in 1912. This Ernest Bush, he lived in Nebraska, and he was kind of like one of the earliest sort of serial killers in America.
Really?
Yeah, and he went by a bunch of aliases too, Gus Grimes and Fred Brown, and he was basically, once they kind of figured out who he was running across the United States, just trying to get away from the law. And Charles Siringo is actually one of the people who found him and busted him. So, yeah, and I know, thank goodness. And so that's actually how I ran across it. But it's kind of cool. It was hard to tie in any Italian Americanism into it, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Because I think it's the time frame, his lifestyle, and he lost his dad when he was a year old.
Right.
So, like if you even think of Kitty Genovese, we talked about, them having dinners and, her pouring the spaghetti over his head and stuff like that. But I still think this is cool because he's Italian American and look at a cowboy. Yeah. And look at the life he led. I mean, he caught criminals. His stories are amazing. And he influenced Hollywood.
Right. That's what he did, kind of a full circle.
He really did. I mean, he did the whole gamut of things that you could think of. And so,
so that blind guy that ran his school was right.
He was onto something. He was definitely onto something. So, like I said, well, there might not be a lot of Italian American aspects to it. He's still an Italian American who had a cool story.
Yeah,
so
very interesting.
Really interesting. But so I think that's about it.
That was a good one.
It was not too bad. Yeah. I enjoyed researching him, and there's a ton of really cool pictures of him that I'll post on Instagram. So
yeah, that'll be nice.
Well, I hope you enjoyed listening to the story of Charles Angelo Siringo, and I hope you come back to listen to more stories about Italian Americans. See you next time, y'all.